Welcome, Age of Vintage Society. Today I bring you an interesting fact about James Brown that you may not know about from the beginning of his career. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. How did James Brown become a singer? Because of prison? Godfather of Soul, James Brown, as the hardest working man in show business. You could bet your bottom dollar that for decades there hasn't been one moment when someone, somewhere in the world, wasn't tapping a toe to a James Brown groove, be it an original recording or one of the many tunes that sampled his work. In the book about his life, Living in America, James Brown told the author, "I never try to express what I actually did," regarding his influence on the American soul scene. I wouldn't try to do that, because definition's such a funny thing. What's put together to make my music, it's something which has real power. It can stir people up and involve them, but it's just something I came to hear. Any modern funk, R&B, soul or hip-hop artist is eternally indebted to the one, the only, soul brother number one, James Brown. His dynamic combination of vocals and dancing ability made him a pioneer in the music industry. Further adding to his legend was the fact that, as interesting as his musical career was, his life as a whole is also worth exploring. Certain aspects of James Brown's life served to further cement his status as an all-time great performer. Other aspects shed some light on how the Godfather of Soul was as a person. One thing remains constant: James Brown was a unique man. Some people just possess God-given talents that normal humans take years to acquire. Such is the case with James Brown and music. As the singer and the leader of various bands throughout his career, he had exacting standards for all of his bandmates. Now, you would think that if a man is to hold other musicians so accountable for their performances, he should be able to speak their language, right? As in, he should be able to read music? Not Brown, though. The Godfather of Soul never learned to read music, yet was gifted with an ear that could point out a single wrong note in an orchestra of blaring instruments. That is a talent that cannot be taught, and that is the level of natural ability that Brown had. His career began in prison. James only made it through 6th grade, and at the age of 16 he went to a juvenile prison for robbery. That's where he started singing with various groups, including the prison's gospel choir. Brown had a few run-ins with law enforcement during his life. When he was 16, he spent time in a juvenile detention centre in Georgia after being convicted of robbery. It was here that he began singing gospel, teaming up with 4 of his cellmates to form a quartet. Brown earned the nickname Music Box due to his singing ability. Not that he would need any more nicknames by the time he was all said and done. James Brown started a gospel quartet called James Brown and the Famous Flames with his fellow cellmates, including Johnny Terry. They started playing in college campuses and nightclubs. Their song Please 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 was an early success, and the group was eventually signed by King Records. The single peaked at number 5 on the Billboard charts. The group reached number 1 on the R&B chart with Try Me in 1959. He would also meet another soon-to-be famous soul, funk and R&B singer in Bobby Byrd. The two would collaborate many more times throughout their careers. As far as serving time goes, this was about as productive as it gets for the Godfather of Soul. Joseph Brown? The Soul Brother #1 was nearly named Joseph Brown. His name was originally intended to be Joseph James Brown. However, his first and middle names were accidentally switched on the birth certificate. Thus, James Joseph Brown, not Joseph James Brown, was born. In hindsight, James Brown has much more of a ring to it than Joseph Brown. Wouldn't you agree? Difficult childhood. He grew up in a brothel. James Brown was born on May 3rd, 1933, to a 16-year-old mother in a small wooden shack in rural South Carolina. His father was abusive, and when James was 6, his parents abandoned him. After that, he lived with his Aunt Honey, who ran a brothel and sold moonshine for a living. James honed his skills by singing and dancing for his aunt's customers. He pretended to be Little Richard. Early in his career, Brown had the same manager as Little Richard, and on more than one occasion the future Godfather of Soul impersonated his friend on stage when the rock and roll pioneer couldn't make a date. Brown reportedly did a great Little Richard impersonation, but he never managed to fool the audience. A perfectionist. James Brown demanded nothing short of perfection from his bandmates. He dubbed himself the hardest working man in show business and required his musicians and backup singers, dancers, to mirror his own tireless attention to detail. All of Brown's bandmates were expected to show up on time and properly dressed to all performances. Otherwise they would be fined or let go. Moreover, they had to be completely sober, and Brown was quick to fire anyone he felt was under the influence during a show or practice. As mentioned earlier, the hardest working man in show business knew his music, even if he couldn't read it. When a musician would miss a note during a song, Brown would wave his fingers mid-dance in the direction of the person that had made the mistake. The number of fingers he threw up corresponded to how hefty of a fine that musician would face after the show. You don't get to James Brown's level of fame without having exacting standards. Not always about music. James Brown's true calling may have always been music, but it was surely not his only interest as a child. Brown also had an affinity for sports, particularly baseball and boxing. As a teenager, he took both of them very seriously, until a leg injury ended his aspirations prematurely. Still, he remained an avid fan, particularly of baseball. Brown said that he modelled some of his dance moves off of the athletic exploits of none other than Jackie Robinson, who broke the colour barrier in MLB in 1947. Robinson's splits while playing first base in the Negro Leagues and in the majors inspired Brown, so he took that move to the stage. He feuded with Joe Tex. Brown and fellow R&B artist Joe Tex had a long-running feud, with each accusing the other of stealing some aspect of his performance style. One night in 1963, Tex opened a show for Brown and came on stage in a tattered cape to make fun of the cape in Brown's act. Brown was so enraged that later that evening he came after Tex with a shotgun. Tex escaped, but Brown started shooting and several people were injured. Those pesky eyebrows. As James Brown got older, he had trouble keeping his eyebrows looking full. He needed normal-looking eyebrows in order to look presentable on stage, but his hair in this area kept falling out. One day the Godfather of Soul had had enough. In 1991, Brown shaved off what remained of his natural eyebrows and replaced them with permanent tattoos. Problem solved. No more worrying about those diminishing brow hairs for Mr. Brown. Brown became famous for his live performance antics. He used his own money to record live at the Apollo in October 1962, over his record company's reservations. The album became a huge success and reached number 2 on the Billboard charts. The same year his single Night Train hit number 5 on the R&B charts and number 35 on pop charts. With the release of Cold Sweat, Brown's unique sound had begun to be described by the press as funk music. Most sampled artist ever. James Brown has been sampled more than any other artist or group ever. His music has been used by other acts over 3,000 times. To put that into perspective, the second most sampled artist, Public Enemy, has less than half of Brown's total. This is a testament to how ahead of his time the Godfather of Soul was, as musicians today are still snipping little pieces of his work and using it to beef up their own careers. Brown's unique rhythms and vocals were beyond revolutionary in the music industry. The emphasis of rhythm in his work infused with the rebellious spirit of the era laid down the anthem of Black America's transition from the civil rights movement to the Black Power movement. The 1968 hit single Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud is frequently cited as one of the most popular civil rights songs. Brown's career slowed down significantly in 1976, only to rise up again in the 1980s when hip-hop musicians emulated his unique sound as a template to evoke another black music revolution. The Godfather of Soul continued to perform and record until his death in 2006 from congestive heart failure.